The Tories have built up the myth of a tyrannical EU that prevails over the years. From now on, the country will experience the economic decline in real life. It's not over. Britain is leaving the EU, or has left the EU now completely, but it's not getting rid of the EU. Brexit is not done. Not done, as the Prime Minister wants his citizens to believe with the slogan. The UK is turning its back on the EU at the end of the year to start flipping on January 1st, and that already happened. And there's a little point where many people are talking about, why don't you see this now? Why don't you see that now? It's already the 4th of January. That has to do with reading the deal again. Even I haven't read the whole thing yet. But in many parts of that deal, there are also small transition periods for certain things, so you don't get a complete change on the 1st of January. That's why you haven't seen many things. And about the borders, a lot of hauliers have just waited and didn't want to go on the first day already again. Because the warehouses are full, there's no need to suddenly stockpile again, because they will have clear access, but we will see how this turns out in the next weeks. And in some cases, for some parts of the deal, we will see in 4 to 6 months how that works out, because that long is how the transition periods for these certain items of the deal are. The hope for freedom will turn out to be a myth over time. The British citizens, on the other hand, will experience the economic decline for real. It is this contradiction that will ensure that the new UK-EU trade deal will be only the first in a long line of other agreements to follow. In the decades to come, every British government will haggle over fixes, more access here, fewer requirements there. Europe will remain a central issue in British politics, much like with Switzerland. The exit from the EU should actually restore sovereignty over its own fate. Control over money, borders, laws and waters, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson put it after the New Deal. In order to restore the dreamed of sovereignty, the British government accepts that the country's prosperity will suffer, as its own experts have calculated. The claim that with the agreement on a trade agreement finally reached on Christmas Eve, the kingdom, utterly victorious, bid farewell to its European neighborhood is just one of the many deceptions and lies. But the British have not always rejected the European project. In 1975, in the first EU referendum, they clearly decided in favor of membership, not least because the overwhelming majority of the press at the time was pro-European. Winston Churchill already drafted the vision of the United States of Europe, first in 1930 and then in 4 major post-war speeches, even if he did not see the then imperial Great Britain as part of this Europe. That even Margaret Thatcher, in a speech to the United States Congress in February 1985, extolled the visionary overcoming of nationalism, patriotism and sovereignty, that's largely forgotten, obviously. The turning point came with the Commission President Jacques Delors and the reform of the European project in the Maastricht treaties that he led. Maastricht created the EU with a common currency and citizenship and overall more integration than the Conservative Party ruling Britain at the time wanted to support. The then British Prime Minister John Major won the controversy over the ratification of the treaties only barely and with tricks. And just to take out another myth here, what happened with Maastricht was not an invention by Jacques Delors and some others at that time. For a long time, and already when the UK joined the EU under another name that time, the European Community, but it always was a plan for deeper cooperation in Europe and not only economically. And you just had to need to listen to Winston Churchill to know where this all is supposed to go in the end. He knew 20 years before it existed. So this is nothing that was just invented then after the UK joined. No, when the UK joined, everybody knew what was supposed to come in the best case in the future. Deeper cooperation, not only economically. But let's go back to Maastricht. At the same time, The Maastricht rebels began the increasingly bitter trench warfare within the Conservative Party, which David Cameron hoped to end with a referendum and which instead drove Great Britain out of the EU. The British Eurosceptic is essentially an English Europhobia of the Tories. As The Economist recently suggested, British European alienation can also be understood as a dispute between a Social Democratic Commission president — Delors was a member of the Parti Socialiste of France — and the conservative British ruling party. But Europe is not to blame for this alienation. For example, British concerns about the euro were by no means unjustified. It would have been good for the European project if the British had not been laughed at too hastily and dismissed as eccentric people with no European understanding. The shrill national patriotic tones from Great Britain made it easier to place British Eurosceptics in this corner. Margaret Thatcher's infamous speech to the College of Europe in Brugge in 1988 formulated the conservative understanding of national sovereignty, which Delors' vision of Europe considered a horror concept. Your government, Thatcher said, has not scaled back the role of the state just to watch a European superstate do it how he was imposing a new supremacy on the British from Brussels. This conservative libertarian understanding of the state resulted in the successful Brexit battle and the Brexit battle cry, "Take back control." It found support from an increasingly ruthless Europhobic press, which urged British patriots to shout out the English equivalent of the Götz von Berlichingen slogan via megaphone from the English coast over the canal to Jacques Delors. And even if I could quote it, just find out what Götz von Berlichingen said. And at the same time, for decades through false reports, the nationalist myth of a tyrannical EU used to claim that the EU banned crooked bananas or required British men to cram their splendor into condoms that were too small. Both complete nonsense, but I still read it almost daily in my comments. That's how nonsense like this can get stuck in people's brains if you only repeat it often enough. The fact that such disinformation was also funny was part of the program, as the humor showed how much the British were superior to the EU and its tyrannical regulations. The understanding of sovereignty that led Johnson's government to sacrifice the economic well-being of the country to alleged independence is rooted in the distortions and falsehoods of such nationalistic, antagonistic perceptions of the EU. It is no coincidence that Johnson, as the European correspondent for the Telegraph in Brussels in the late 1980s, contributed to the falsehoods with his reporting. Just as it is not a coincidence that the Brexit campaign advertised with lies like the £350 million a week bus. Because the understanding of national sovereignty, on which radical Brexiteers like Johnson built their vision of a kingdom supposedly independent of the EU, does not stand up to the facts. Johnson's assertion that with the exit from the EU and with a trade treaty that avoids the European Court of Justice retaining powers over British decisions, and which is already wrong for Northern Ireland, ECJ judgments remain relevant there, Great Britain could again control its own fate, dramatically fails to recognize the dependencies of states in contemporary reality. The variety of confusing bureaucratic rules and regulations that British and continental European entrepreneurs will have to grapple with in the future if they want to continue trading with each other are testimony to this. The unreasonableness and loopholes of this first attempt to regulate trade relations with the EU as a non-member lead experts such as Charles Grant, director of the think tank Centre for European Reform, to predict that Britain will now negotiate one agreement after another with the EU. The Brexiteers once claimed that the EU lacks democratic accountability. Britain had to become sovereign again so that the British government could take direct responsibility for its own citizens. The reality of the new sovereign British state belies that promise too. Parliament was forced on one Wednesday to whip through the trade agreement with the EU in a few hours. That is not enough for democratic control. When Eurosceptic Tories rebelled against the Maastricht Treaty 30 years ago, they were allowed to raise their objections on 41 days of debate. And if you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel and my other channels. I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.